everyone. Thank you, Farah. So the starting point of my story today is daylight, as you said. Daylight is my second love, and is the beginning of my design career in Arup. Everything we know in our world comes from the sun. Energy, materials, the chemistry of light itself, life itself, how we feel, we see, and understand the world. And working, I've learned to see the sun in how buildings and windows have been shaped around the world, and how generation of builders have perfected building techniques and passed design ideas through a body of traditional construction methods that are rooted in the local climate, created by the interaction between sunlight, the atmosphere, the local environment. Daylight has shaped buildings, but it has also sculpted cities. This is the little tiny city where I was born, and you can see the narrow streets where the sun creates dark shadows, even in the hottest hours. And sunlight is considered the enemy, essentially. While in northern cities, like moving to London here, streets and back gardens let sunlight reach the interiors of endless rows of terraced houses. And in this case, sun for most of the time has been seen actually a friend. So these buildings and cities shapes are the results of thousands of years of incremental changes done by builders, generation after generation. And we can consider this as an optimization algorithm, and it's essentially what vernacular architecture is. So this optimization strategy is very similar to the way nature works through evolution. And I believe that vernacular buildings and cities have been essentially evolving like plants, because they show collective behavioral adaptation to climate and daylight. So vernacular passive buildings, I believe, are the flora of the built environment. So I'll try to explain this with a couple of examples. The first example is this prototype kindergarten in the village of Duabor in Ghana. And it is an entirely passive building. It harvests rainwater and works only with natural light and natural ventilation. To provide an optimal visual and thermal environment for learning, it was key to get the passive design right, and this could only be realized by letting diffuse light in and avoiding direct solar gains and glare. This was achieved with simple design ideas integrated into the architectural shape. So you can see in my early design sketches that generous overhangs were introduced to shield the exterior walls from the hot high-angle sunlight. And the design of the windows included vertical adjustable louvers to modulate the interior illumination while still keeping the interior shaded when the sun is low. So these are the windows. They do let also the airflow a little light to penetrate when they're closed. They create an adaptable learning environment that can support all the activities in the school, so the kids can sleep and they can, carry they can play inside, and it's really an adaptable environment. So these shading techniques could only work by letting the school find its own ideal orientation with respect to the path of the sun in the sky. This passive building can only work in this particular orientation because only in this configuration it can use the energy of the sun wisely. Another example is the canopy of the Perez Art Museum in Miami, which Farah already mentioned. So the desire in this case was to reduce its weight and material use, and we decided to challenge the design by identifying areas where shading performance could be relaxed. And so if we look closer and closer at the roof, we can see that there are areas where the shading is more dense. In this diagram, they're shown in red color, and areas where the shading elements are gradually reduced. So the ones that are shown in green, blue, and then white. So this diagram is actually the result of the optimization technique we used to identify the zones of the roof that had the highest potential to shade the art galleries, and to shade also the places where people gather, so the outside. And we've decided to keep the highest degree of shading in these areas. In both examples I've presented, the geometric design of the building is tuned to the local climate. So the shape is really connected with the local place. And I think that the passive daylight feature that I've designed, so far in the project I've worked on, bear really a strong resemblance with the way vernacular buildings have evolved. These daylight designs are like plants that try to find the sun to either celebrate it or shy away from it. But I also think that the high level of automation that we currently design, because buildings are maybe in more urban dense environments cannot be tuned to sunlight, is changing buildings into something else. Since we've introduced water, air, electricity flows, well, especially since we started adding communication and control networks, I think the buildings are morphing into animals. So what is the difference between flora and fauna? what is the difference between plants and animals? We know from our biology books that there are certain physiological differences in the way plants and animal cells are made, in the way they create and store food, in the way they breathe. Well, I think that the most striking difference between the plants and the animal kingdoms is the development of a sensorial and nervous systems in animals. This is what makes animals feel pain, be conscious, and the reason number one why I've chosen to be vegetarian, if you know me. So animals have feelings, and animals like humans, chimpanzees, dolphins, elephants, can feel fear, loneliness, they feel love, and have developed personal individual characters that translate into complex social structures and behaviors. So if buildings are turning into animals, can they also have behaviors? I think on a more superficial level, we humans have patterns in our mind that make us anthropomorphize anything we see. We want to see people everywhere. We want to see faces anywhere, like in this case, or in this case. You know, these are just patterns in our mind, or in this one. But I think more ambiguously, we like to use adjectives like intelligent or smart for inanimate objects as well. So I think it could be useful in this context to have a quick look at a great web tool that I like to use. It's offered by Google. I don't know if any one of you has been playing with it. But it can really give an insight of how often a search term is entered in relation with time. I've put 3 search terms to the test to see how the interest in them has changed over time. The first one is climate change. So I've entered the term there, and you see from about 2004 up until now, we can see how this word has been searched or featured in the news. And yeah, it's quite easy to see that there's one peak in there when the Cancun Climate Change Conference was made. So yeah, you can read these sort of events. If we correlate then with the term sustainability, we can see that they go hand in hand. They show similar kind of seasonal variation, which I've tried to understand what really it is. And it looks like when we go on holiday in summer and for Christmas, you see that about 1/3 of the world actually doesn't think much more about sustainability anymore. So, you know, it's something interesting there. But now we'll correlate that with the word smart. And you see there is a lot more talking into what smart stuff is. It's about 50 times bigger than and, you know, our discussion about climate change or sustainability. Why can that be? I guess this is due to the emergence of smart watches, smartphones, smart washing machines, smart lighting, smart homes, smart cities, and so on. But maybe ask myself, who is really smart? Or rather, as Farah suggested when we discussed this presentation, who is clever? Can our technological objects be clever, or is this cleverness an attribute we should associate to the user instead? So for some time I've been thinking the latter. So I think that I thought that so-called smart objects add communication superpowers to people and can facilitate clever behavior to some extent, expanding our abilities and making us more efficient. Although maybe we can argue that the opposite by looking at this picture. But I've already changed my mind. We see artificial intelligence and learning behaviors inside more and more software and hardware products around us. We sold this sort of stuff. And this is changing, I think, our way of interacting with technology as we've only seen before in science fiction. Speaking of science fiction, it might be useful to have a quick refresher of the 3 laws of robotics that have been introduced by Isaac Asimov with the purpose to define a peaceful coexistence between humans and artificial intelligence, in this case, robots. These are quoted from the Handbook of Robotics, 56th edition, 2058 AD, just about 43 years into the future. So the first law is a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. The second law is a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third one is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. So these laws are intended to be a safety feature embedded into all the robots to avoid harming humans, because humans are obviously more important. They are very logical and easy to measure. It is easy to understand whether a human has been harmed or not, or whether an action is going to harm a human or not. They also start from the principle that artificial intelligence is at the service of humanity, and that robots are slaves, forced labor. In fact, the meaning of the word robot is forced labor. So later on, Asimov added a 0 law that applies to robots making strategic government decisions and extended the first law from a single human to humanity as a whole. A robot may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. I think this law is quite fuzzy and is quite difficult to activate. So how can we define what can harm or not harm humanity? I'll try some examples. Excessive production of greenhouse gases, nuclear weapons, military drones, smartphones, too many calories, artificial intelligence itself. So we need a super intelligence that is not human to understand this. The fact is that the three laws are defined rationally, and we humans don't behave rationally most of the time. In fact, we can argue that continuous pure logic behavior, like we can see that in people who are affected by autism, for instance, is perceived as inflexible and not normal. We can't always be rational. Normal humans show emotions and have a level of unpredictability in making decisions that is affected by cognitive bias. And it's also interesting to see how brain scans show that humans cannot be logical and empathetic at the same time. Separate neural pathways are activated alternately when using emotional intelligence and analytic problem solving. So these images show quite shockingly how our consciousness is created out of inanimate matter by patterns from in our brains. I mean, we can see inside our brains, these patterns emerge out of inanimate matter. So this is the theory that Douglas Hofstadter has explained in his books, and that quite funnily can even be seen in the structure of his almost famous quote, the Hofstadter law. I'll read it for you. It always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account the Hofstadter's law. So this is quite a nice piece of wisdom that is very useful in most project management situations. But more importantly, it shows a self-referential pattern, a feedback loop that Hofstadter believes is what makes us an animal conscious and creates behavior. In his research, he tries to create programs that can refer to themselves, and by this, he believes that actually can make them think about themselves. So when in the near future we'll design our buildings to be clever, will we make them servants and opt for perfect logic and determinism, or will we decide to make them thinking friends by adding feedback loops and unpredictability? What shall we do? So while we're waiting for that moment, we must recognize that buildings are changing. And if they're morphing into animals, we need to reconsider the way we interact with them. So why don't we start talking to them? Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Francesco.
Francesco who?
Anselmo.
Employee number 28,130 validated. What can I do for you?
Where am I?
You're in the Emerson
and Shears
room.
Okay, right. Why are you so slow?
It's because of your funny Italian accent.
Come on, go on. Okay. Can you dim the lights as they were before?
Sure, light dimmed.
Okay. Can you help me with something?
Sure. How can I help?
Can you continue the presentation?
Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Come on. Can you continue the presentation, please?
Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying.
Come on. Please, can you continue the presentation?
I will be extremely delighted to conclude the presentation for you.
Right, that's great.
You can sit back and relax, but you'll have to change my slides.
Right, okay.
Next slide, please. We buildings and cities are getting more networked. Our assets are digitalized and connected to the web of things. We can extend our inner and outer senses to gather more information about your world. We can filter it to find the patterns you need to make decisions. Next slide. But you need to give us a way to talk back. to give you back this wealth of knowledge and insight using your own ways to communicate. You need to give us a voice. You need to give us a face. Next slide, please. We want to play with you. We want to connect with you and let you decide how to adapt the environment inside us to your individual needs. We can find new ways to interact with you and learn from you so that you don't have to reprogram us anymore. Next slide, Francesco. We can give you emotions, but will you show us your feelings? Because it's you, people, who make buildings and cities alive. Next slide, please. Thank you for listening.
You're a very clever building.
You're welcome. You're a very nice audience.
Thank you. Okay, good. It worked. Unbelievable.
Oh God, I'm so glad.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So any questions for the building?
How long do you think it will be before building interactions with humans will be much more commonplace throughout infrastructure?
Yeah. There's, I mean, you can see already now in the home, in the domestic market, lots of products who actually do exactly what I'm showing here. And they do it, obviously you've got Siri, and so you've got a system like this that are already commonplace. Commercial buildings are a lot more complex, obviously. They're designed in different ways. The infrastructure is different. And so there's a level of understanding how to link that. At the moment, there's a big gamble on how long it will take to bring artificial intelligence more into stuff we do. So how this narrow intelligence that now we feature, so this the voice recognition we see here is narrow intelligence, how it will translate into more general intelligence, where we can actually ask things and then intelligence will go and fetch information for us. It's sort of happening now slowly with designers going a lot more into deep brain architectures, deep mind, deep thought architectures. Some people might say that it can be another 10 years. And then after that, there is this big fear of what superintelligence might come, because once you have an intelligence that can be very generic, what is the step of connecting there, learning from all the stuff what we already have, and then making something that is quite dangerous. So I think we need to reflect on this, and we need to maybe join the debate. And I think as designers, we need to understand that as well. What are the limitations of what we do? There's a whole range of other barriers which have to do with just we humans are not rational. I said it before. So it's really dealing with the irrationality of human beings. And security, for instance, is one of those. A robot, if you program it, or if you tell it, if you put these barriers and maybe these laws, wouldn't want to break into a system. But humans, for some reasons, want to, or they want to circumvent, trust and other things. So security is a barrier to a lot of this coming in. Even me putting this system in here, I had to go through lots of negotiation with people in terms of getting security approval, audiovisual, and so on. So it's not super easy, but it can be done. And I think one of the reasons it can be done is also because we can use open technologies. And I think those technologies have a role in actually facilitating the way we create behaviors in buildings that then are better. Make better interaction between people and systems.
You raise a really interesting point about the sort of irrationality of people, and I wonder how technology is going to respond to that. I mean, you can already buy a fridge that links to your shopping basket and orders things when they're empty, and then does it start counting calories? Is it linked to your scales in the bathroom? I mean, at what point, or where do you think that balance lies in terms of where it's a smart suggestion or it's actually just irritating?
Sure. Yeah, I think you need to train the system. It's really this idea of learning, and it depends on how it is made. But I think it's really the key. It's all in really, and so the systems can really be trained. I've been exploring a little bit how you can create systems that actually understand your tone of voice, or there are systems out there. There are research projects already look at that, and so there are possibilities like that, getting clues from this sort of little things. This then leads to the point where will the machine actually be able to reflect on that, or will it just be a response of a software? And that's where I think people like Douglas Hofstadter really have a lot to say. I mean, all his work is really about trying to understand what really makes ourselves. So why am I? Why can I tell the time myself? Can a machine do that? And I think that is really interesting. Obviously, it's really scary because if it goes into the commercial world, who knows what's going to happen. I think there's the news. Elon Musk funded quite a lot of projects for. I think there's an institution about the future life. I think it's called. That is investing into artificial intelligence research and trying to avoid it going too far into. So we'll see what happens. I think we need to bear this responsibility. I think
do you see a contradiction between Asimov's Law Zero for robotics and the increasing sort of individual responses that we're demanding from buildings? So it's usually, can you make it hotter, can you make it cooler for individuals, where the building might want to respond, well, sorry, but humanity is not going to allow you.
No, sure. I mean, myself, when I prepared this presentation, I wanted to make this point that I really started with passive design because, and I think, it's great, but I found myself entangled into all these automatic systems, which have been given from the top down, essentially, up to this moment. And so I can see the advantage of democratizing the sort of response of the building. But democracy has to do with voting, right? So I think that is maybe the mechanism that can work in sort of environments which are shared. And maybe, our buildings are changing as well. Workplaces are changing. They're becoming maybe more adaptable environments. So maybe the key is there. How can you maybe adapt to the space where you are in a maybe more personal way? And I think we've been doing some research on that. I think it's an interesting field. But I do agree. I do agree that when you say harm a human being, you can take it at that level, and there's a conflict between humans because everyone is different. Yeah.
Are you looking at these new technologies and systems in sort of new buildings and starting from scratch with the design of the building, or does it also apply to existing the existing buildings that are there which need transformation?
Mm-hmm. It does apply to. It could apply to any building. I think it's a wise choice of the technology needs to be made depending on the sort of constraints you have. But it's really there's a lot of wireless networking is very easy these days. All the stuff that all the bits that are running behind, just today's demonstration, for instance, were taken from open source projects. So the code that can be shared and can be improved by doing adding stuff and then releasing that back into the network. So even these solutions are not even expensive, essentially. With a bit of this is where I think it's exciting. With a bit of creativity, we could change a little bit the way we interact with buildings, potentially for the better, yeah. But it needs to be done in a way that is, I think, pertinent to the application. But yeah, it does apply to any building. Yeah.
As ever, it's a fascinating talk, but I can't decide whether to be scared by what I was hearing there. I think it might be because I'm so incredibly old. It's obviously the technology. I haven't quite got to grips with it myself, but I can see that when I get my smart fridge, smart watch, I need to get smarter as well. So, very interesting.
I thought his talk was really interesting and inspiring as to what we might be doing in 10, 15, 20 years' time with the buildings that are around us. And these things, I think, pretty much everything he talked about, you can see happening very, very soon. We need to be looking at these things right now. And some of these things are already happening. I mean, certainly in the sort of technology markets, you can already buy smart fridges and whatever else. We've all got a smartphone in our pockets. So it's now. But I think bigger picture in terms of real change in the urban environment, it's something we've got to consider right now.
I do really enjoy these talks, and especially coming from a sort of marketing kind of background, it's so fascinating to hear about, some of the more technological things that I don't often get to be exposed to in my role. And it's just, it's great to be able to come to these. I really enjoy them.